The rifle cracked through the canyon air like thunder, and Penelope Lancaster hit the dirt harder than she had ever hit anything in her 22 years of Boston-bred existence. She tasted blood and rock dust as rough hands grabbed her shoulders, dragging her behind an overturned wagon while bullets splintered the wood above her head. The stagecoach driver was already dead, his body sprawled in the Nevada dirt 20 feet away, and the guard who had sworn to protect the passengers was clutching his shoulder and screaming. 3 bandits circled on horseback like vultures, their faces hidden behind red bandanas, their guns gleaming in the merciless afternoon sun. "Money and jewelry now," one of them shouted, and his voice was high and sharp with excitement. "Do it quick and maybe you live." Penelope's fingers trembled as she reached for the small purse at her waist. Inside was everything she owned in the world now, $37, and the gold locket that had belonged to her mother. The other passenger, an elderly merchant, was already throwing his wallet toward the bandits with shaking hands. She had come west to escape, to start over, to leave behind the suffocating parlors of Boston society and the man her father had tried to force her to marry. She had spent every penny she had saved to buy passage on this stage heading to Rawhide, Nevada, where her cousin had promised her work at the general store. 3 days of rattling over terrible roads, choking on dust, sleeping in flea-ridden way stations. And now this. Faster. The bandit shouted, spurring his horse closer. Penelope's fingers closed around the locket, over her dead body. This was all she had left of her mother, who had died when Penelope was 14. The woman who had told her stories of adventure and far-off places, who had made her promise never to let anyone make her small. She looked up at the bandit, meeting his eyes above the bandana. "No." The word came out steadier than she felt. The bandit blinked, clearly not expecting defiance from a woman in a dusty traveling dress with her dark hair coming loose from its pins. "What did you say?" I said no. Penelope's heart hammered against her ribs, but she kept her chin up. The bandit laughed, and it was an ugly sound. He raised his pistol, pointing it directly at her face. "Wrong answer, lady." The shot that followed did not come from his gun. It came from somewhere high up in the rocks, and it took the bandit's hat clean off his head. The man yelped and his horse reared, nearly throwing him. His 2 companions wheeled their mounts, searching for the source of the shot. "Who's there?" one of them shouted. "Show yourself." For a moment, there was only silence broken by the restless stamping of horses and the wounded guard's labored breathing. Then a figure emerged from behind a massive boulder 30 yards up the slope. Penelope had never seen a man like him in her life. He was enormous, easily 6.5 feet tall, with shoulders that seemed to block out the sun. His hair was dark brown and hung past his shoulders, tied back roughly with a piece of leather cord. He wore buckskin pants and a worn cotton shirt that strained across a chest and arms built from what must have been years of hard mountain living. His face was weathered and tanned, with a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of dark stubble. He carried a rifle in his hands with the casual ease of a man who had been born holding one, and his eyes were the coldest blue she had ever seen. "Leave," he said. His voice was deep and quiet, but it carried across the canyon like the growl of a bear. The bandits looked at each other. 3 of them, one of him. "This ain't your business, mountain man," the leader said, trying to sound brave. "Ride on." The stranger did not move. "I will not say it again." Something in his tone made Penelope's skin prickle. This was not a man who bluffed. The second bandit raised his pistol, aiming at the stranger. He never got the shot off. The rifle cracked again, and the gun went flying from the bandit's hand, leaving him howling and clutching his fingers. The stranger had already cocked the lever and was aiming again before the echo faded. "Jesus Christ!" The third bandit yelped, "Let's get out of here." They did not need to be told twice. The leader grabbed his companion's reins, and all three of them spurred their horses into a gallop, disappearing around the bend in the canyon in a cloud of dust and terror. The stranger watched them go, his rifle never wavering, until the sound of hoofbeats faded completely. Then he lowered the weapon and started down the slope. Penelope scrambled to her feet, her legs shaky beneath her skirts. The elderly merchant was already babbling his thanks, but the stranger walked past him without a word, heading straight for the wounded guard. He knelt beside the man, examining the shoulder wound with practiced efficiency. "Bullet went through," he said. "You will live if you do not do anything stupid." He pulled a bandana from his pocket, wadded it up, and pressed it firmly against the wound. "Hold this. Tight." The guard nodded, his face pale but grateful. The stranger stood and finally looked at Penelope and the merchant. "Rawhide is 8 miles east," he said. "Stay on the road. There is a ranch 5 miles ahead if you need help before that." He turned to leave. "Wait," Penelope said, finding her voice. "You are just going to leave?" He looked back at her, and she felt the full weight of those blue eyes. Up close, he was even more imposing. His face was hard and carved, with sharp cheekbones and a nose that had been broken at least once. There was a scar cutting through his left eyebrow. He looked like he had been built from the mountains themselves. "Yes," he said simply. "We owe you our lives," the merchant said. "At least tell us your name, sir, so we can thank you properly." For a moment the stranger looked like he might refuse. Then he said, "Jacob Owens." "I am Charles Montgomery," the merchant said, "and this is Miss Lancaster," Penelope supplied. "Penelope Lancaster, Mr. Owens, I cannot simply let you walk away. You saved us." "Surely there must be something we can do to repay you." Jacob's expression did not change. "No need. Keep your money. Use it to get to town." His gaze flicked to the dead driver, and something that might have been regret crossed his face. "Bury him proper." He started to turn away again, and that was when Penelope saw them. 4 more riders cresting the ridge behind Jacob, their horses picking their way through the rocks. She recognized the red bandanas immediately. "Behind you," she shouted. Jacob spun, bringing his rifle up, but he was not fast enough. One of the bandits fired first, and the bullet spanged off the rocks inches from Jacob's head, forcing him to dive for cover. The 4 riders spread out, circling, and now Jacob was caught in the open with limited cover. Penelope's heart jumped into her throat. The bandits had come back with reinforcements, and they were angry. Jacob fired once, twice, dropping one of the horses and forcing its rider to roll clear. But there were still 3 more, and they were closing in from different angles. Jacob's rifle clicked empty. He ducked behind the overturned wagon, his hands moving fast to reload, but Penelope could see the bandits spurring their horses closer. They had him. In seconds they would ride him down. She did not think. She just moved. Jacob's rifle was leaning against the wagon where he had set it down while helping the guard. Penelope grabbed it, the weight surprising and heavy in her hands. She had never fired a gun in her life, but she had watched the men shooting, had seen how Jacob held it. She brought the rifle to her shoulder, aimed at the closest bandit, and pulled the trigger. The recoil slammed into her shoulder hard enough to make her stagger, and her ears rang with the blast. Her shot went wide, kicking up dust 5 feet to the bandit's left, but it was enough. The man yanked on his reins in surprise, his horse shying sideways. Jacob's head snapped around, his eyes going wide. For the first time since she had seen him, he looked genuinely shocked. "What are you doing?" he shouted. "Helping." Penelope shouted back, working the lever to chamber another round like she had seen him do. Her hands shook, but she raised the rifle again. This time she aimed more carefully, taking a breath like her father's hunting instructor had once told her brother to do. She squeezed the trigger, and this shot came closer, close enough that the bandit cursed and wheeled his horse around. Jacob stared at her for one more second, and she could not read the expression on his face. Then he turned back to the bandits, his own rifle reloaded now, and fired a shot that took the hat off one of the riders. "There are 7 of us now," Jacob shouted, his voice carrying across the canyon. It was a bluff, a desperate attempt to make the bandits think reinforcements had arrived. "Leave now or die here." The bandits looked at each other. They had already lost 1 horse, and now this crazy woman was shooting at them too. The odds did not look as good as they had a minute ago. "This is not over," the leader shouted, but he was already turning his horse. "We will remember you, mountain man." They fled again, this time heading north into the rocks where pursuit would be difficult. Jacob kept his rifle trained on them until they disappeared, then finally lowered it. He turned to Penelope. She was still holding his other rifle, her knuckles white around the stock, her shoulder throbbing from the recoil. She met his eyes, trying to look braver than she felt. For a long moment, Jacob Owens was completely silent. Then he walked over, gently took the rifle from her hands and said, "Where did you learn to shoot?" "I did not," Penelope admitted. "That was my first time." His eyebrows rose fractionally. "You hit close for your first time. I missed. But you tried." Something that might have been respect flickered in those cold blue eyes. "Most people would have run." "I am not most people," Penelope said, and was surprised by how true it felt. A week ago, she would have fainted at the sight of blood. Now she had just fired a gun at armed bandits. Jacob studied her for a moment longer, and she studied him right back. Up close, she could see the details she had missed before. The calluses on his hands, the way his muscles moved under his shirt as he shifted his weight, the surprising fullness of his mouth in that hard, weathered face. He smelled like wood smoke and pine and something wild she could not name. "Thank you," he said finally. "That was either very brave or very stupid." "Probably both," Penelope said, and to her surprise the corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile but close. The merchant cleared his throat. "I hate to interrupt, but we should move. Those bandits might come back with even more men." Jacob nodded. "He is right. We need to get you to Rawhide before dark." He looked at the dead driver and his jaw tightened. "Help me get him on one of the horses. We will take him to town." Together they managed to lift the driver's body onto one of the stage horses that had not bolted. The wounded guard could ride, though he was pale and shaky. The merchant could ride. That left Penelope. "I do not ride," she admitted. "I was always in a carriage." Jacob looked at her, then at his own horse, a massive buckskin gelding that looked as wild as its owner. "You will ride with me." Penelope's heart did a strange little flip. "With you? Unless you want to walk 8 miles in those shoes." He glanced at her button-up boots, which were completely unsuitable for desert walking. "Thought not. Come on." He swung up onto his horse with an ease that spoke of years in the saddle, then reached down to her. Penelope hesitated for only a second before taking his hand. His palm was warm and rough and absolutely engulfed hers. He pulled her up behind him as if she weighed nothing at all, settling her on the horse's back. "Hold on," he said. Penelope had no choice but to wrap her arms around his waist. She could feel the solid muscle of his torso through his shirt, the steady rise and fall of his breathing. Heat radiated from him like a furnace, and despite the desert sun, she found herself pressing closer. Jacob made a clicking sound with his tongue, and the horse started forward at an easy walk. The merchant and the guard followed, leading the horse carrying the driver's body. "What were you doing out here?" Penelope asked after a while, trying to break the strange intimacy of the silence. "Do you live nearby?" "Have a cabin in the mountains," Jacob said. 3 days north. Come down every few months for supplies. You live alone? Yes. That must be lonely. He shrugged and she felt the movement through her whole body. I like the quiet. Why? The question came out before she could stop it. Why live so far from people? For a long time he did not answer. Then he said, people bring trouble, mountains do not. There was a weight to those words, a history she could sense but not see. Penelope wanted to ask more, but something in the set of his shoulders told her not to push. Not yet. They rode in silence for a while, the sun beating down on them. Penelope's dress was soaked with sweat, her hair sticking to her neck. She could not imagine how Jacob could stand wearing buckskin in this heat, but he did not seem bothered. He sat his horse like he had grown there, relaxed and alert at the same time. "Why did you come west?" he asked suddenly. The question surprised her. "I needed a new start. Running from something?" "Someone," she admitted. "My father tried to arrange a marriage to a man 3 times my age, a business associate. I said no. He said I had no choice, so I left." Jacob was quiet for a moment. That took courage. "Or stupidity," Penelope said, echoing his words from earlier. "I am not sure which yet." This time she definitely felt him almost laugh, though he made no sound. "Fair enough. What about you?" she ventured. "What are you running from?" His body tensed beneath her hands, and she knew she had crossed a line. "I am not running," he said, and his voice had gone cold again. "I just prefer mountains to people." They did not speak again for the rest of the ride. Rawhide appeared on the horizon as the sun was beginning its descent toward the mountains. It was not much of a town, just a collection of weathered wooden buildings scattered along a single main street. Penelope could see a general store, a saloon, what looked like a boarding house, and a small building with sheriff painted on the door. Jacob rode straight to the sheriff's office and dismounted, then reached up to help Penelope down. His hands spanned her waist completely, and he lifted her as easily as he might lift a child. For a moment she was pressed against his chest, looking up into those blue eyes from inches away. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." Something flickered across his face, too quick to read. Then he set her on her feet and stepped back, putting distance between them. The sheriff came out, a lean man in his 50s with a badge pinned to his vest. "Jacob Owens," he said, surprise clear in his voice. "Did not expect to see you for another month." "Bandit trouble on the canyon road," Jacob said. 7 of them, maybe more. They hit the stage. Driver is dead." The sheriff's expression darkened. "Damn. That is the 3rd stage this month." He looked at the body draped over the horse and sighed. "Bring him around back. I will get the undertaker." He glanced at Penelope and the merchant. "You folks all right?" "Thanks to Mr. Owens," the merchant said. "He saved our lives." The sheriff nodded, unsurprised. "Jacob's good at that." He looked at the wounded guard. "Doc's office is 2 doors down. Get that shoulder looked at." Then his attention returned to Jacob. "You staying in town tonight?" "No. You should. Doc Miller would want to see you, and you probably need supplies. Plus, those bandits know you now. They might be looking for revenge." Jacob's expression did not change. "Let them look." "Stubborn as ever," the sheriff said, but there was fondness in his voice. "At least come to the saloon for a drink. My treat. It is the least I can do." Jacob looked like he wanted to refuse, but then his gaze slid to Penelope, still standing there in her dusty dress with her hair falling down and her shoulders aching from the rifle's recoil. Something in his expression shifted. "1 drink," he said. "Then I leave." The sheriff grinned. "I will take it. Come by in an hour. I need to deal with this mess first." He gestured to the body and his smile faded. Jacob nodded and turned to his horse, preparing to leave. "Wait," Penelope said. She stepped forward, reaching into her purse. "Please let me pay you something." "I know you said you did not need it, but no." Jacob's voice was firm. "Keep your money, Miss Lancaster. You will need it more than I will. But I owe you my life." He looked at her, and for the first time she saw something almost soft in his eyes. "You tried to save mine, too. We are even." Before she could argue, he swung onto his horse and rode off down the street, heading toward what looked like the general store. Penelope watched him go, feeling strangely bereft. She had only met the man a few hours ago, and yet the thought of never seeing him again left an unexpected ache in her chest. "Come on, miss," the merchant said kindly. "Let's get you settled. Where were you staying?" "My cousin runs the general store," Penelope said, tearing her gaze away from Jacob's retreating back. "Sarah Lewis." "I know Sarah. Good woman. Let me walk you over." The general store was a sturdy building with a false front and large windows displaying tools, fabric, and various household goods. A bell chimed as they entered, and a woman looked up from behind the counter. She was in her early 30s with blonde hair pinned in a neat bun and a warm smile. "Penelope," Sarah rushed around the counter and pulled her into a hug. "Thank God you are here. When I heard the stage was late, I was so worried." "We were attacked," Penelope said, and suddenly the whole day caught up with her. Her legs went weak and Sarah had to hold her up. "Attacked? By who? Are you hurt?" "Bandits. The driver was killed, but a man saved us. A mountain man named Jacob Owens." Sarah's eyes widened. "Jacob Owens saved you. You know him." "Everyone knows of Jacob Owens. He is a legend around here. Came west 8 years ago after the war, bought land up in the mountains, and has barely come down since. People say he can shoot the eye out of an eagle from 100 yards away. They say he once tracked a wounded bear for 3 days through a blizzard and killed it with just a knife." Sarah helped Penelope to a chair in the back room. "They also say he does not talk much." "That part is true," Penelope said weakly. "Sarah, I shot a gun today at Bandits." Her cousin stared at her. "You, Penelope Louise Lancaster, who fainted at her own brother's hunting stories." "I know. I can hardly believe it myself." Penelope looked down at her shaking hands. "But Jacob was in trouble and I could not let him die." Something knowing crossed Sarah's face. "Jacob, is it? And how did this mountain man look?" "He is very large," Penelope said, feeling her cheeks heat. "And strong. And he has these eyes like winter sky," and she stopped, seeing Sarah's expression. "What? Nothing," Sarah said innocently. "Just that I have never heard you describe a man like that before. I am merely being factual." "Of course you are." Sarah patted her hand. "Let me get you some water and something to eat. Then you can tell me everything." Over the next hour, while Penelope cleaned up and changed into fresh clothes from her trunk, she told Sarah the whole story. Her cousin listened with wide eyes, interrupting only to exclaim at the more dramatic parts. "And he is going to the saloon tonight?" Sarah asked when Penelope finished. "The sheriff invited him for a drink." "Then you should go too," Penelope blinked. "To a saloon? Sarah, ladies do not go to saloons. This is not Boston, cousin. This is Nevada. And besides, the saloon here is not like the ones you are thinking of. It is also the town's only restaurant. Plenty of respectable people eat there." Sarah gave her a pointed look. "You should thank him properly. He saved your life." "I already thanked him." "Then thank him again. And maybe talk to him. Get to know him." "Sarah." "Penelope, listen to me." Sarah took her hands, her expression serious. "You came out here to start a new life, right? To be brave and independent and free. Well, this is your chance. Jacob Owens is a good man. Everyone says so. He does not come to town often, and when he does not stay long. If you want to see him again, you need to do it tonight." Penelope's heart hammered. "Who says I want to see him again?" Sarah just smiled. "You do. It is written all over your face. You like him." "I do not even know him." "So get to know him. What is the worst that could happen? He says no. Actually, Penelope realized there were much worse things that could happen. She had already been shot at today. A little rejection seemed almost trivial by comparison. "All right," she heard herself say. "I will go." The Rawhide Saloon was called the Lucky Coyote, and it was exactly as Sarah had described. Yes, there was a bar along one wall where men stood drinking whiskey and beer. Yes, there were a few rough-looking characters playing cards in the corner. But there were also tables with checkered cloths where families sat eating dinner, and a menu board advertising roast chicken and potatoes. Penelope entered just as the sun was setting, casting orange light through the windows. She had changed into her nicest day dress, a dark green calico that brought out her eyes, and had managed to tame her hair back into a respectable bun. She felt horribly out of place and desperately conspicuous. Then she saw Jacob. He was sitting at a table near the back with the sheriff, a glass of whiskey in his large hand. He had not changed clothes, still wearing the same buckskin and cotton shirt, but he had pulled his hair back more neatly. Even sitting down, he dominated the space around him. The sheriff saw her first and waved her over. "Miss Lancaster, come join us." Jacob's head came up and his eyes locked with hers across the room. For a moment she thought she saw surprise there and something else she could not name. She walked over on unsteady legs, very aware of the other patrons watching her. "Please sit," the sheriff said, standing politely and pulling out a chair for her. "I am Sheriff William Grant. Jacob was just telling me more about the attack. Thank you." Penelope sat, trying not to notice how close her chair was to Jacob's. She could smell wood smoke and pine again. "I hope I am not interrupting." "Not at all. In fact, I was hoping to talk to you." Sheriff Grant settled back into his chair. "I need to file a report about the attack." "Can you describe the bandits?" Penelope did her best, describing what she had seen of their faces, their horses, anything that might help identify them. Jacob added details she had missed, his memory for specifics impressive. The sheriff took notes, his expression growing grimmer. "Sounds like the same group that has been hitting stages and freight wagons for the past 2 months, he said finally. "They are getting bolder." 7 or 8 men, you say? "At least," Jacob confirmed. "Maybe more waiting in reserve." "I will wire the territorial marshal, see if we can get some help running them down." Sheriff Grant drained his whiskey. "In the meantime, I am posting warnings. No stages travel alone anymore." He stood. "I will leave you two to your dinner. Miss Lancaster, Jacob." He tipped his hat and headed for the bar. Suddenly, Penelope was alone with Jacob. The silence stretched between them, awkward and charged. Jacob took a slow drink of his whiskey, his eyes on the amber liquid rather than her. "Are you staying at the general store?" he asked finally. "Yes." "My cousin Sarah runs it. She has a spare room upstairs." Penelope twisted her hands in her lap. "Are you really leaving tonight?" "Was planning to." "In the dark? Is not that dangerous?" His mouth twitched. "I know the trails. But the bandits are not stupid enough to follow me into the mountains at night." He set his glass down and finally looked at her. "Why did you come here, Miss Lancaster?" The question caught her off guard. "I told you I needed to thank you." "You already did, twice." Heat rose in her cheeks. I wanted to see you again." The words hung between them, too honest, too raw. Jacob stared at her and she could not read his expression. "Why?" he asked finally. "Because you saved my life. Because you are different from any man I have ever met. Because when I held on to you on that horse, I felt safer than I have felt in years." The words kept coming, tumbling out before she could stop them. "Because you did not treat me like I was fragile or stupid when I grabbed your rifle. You did not yell at me or tell me to hide. You respected me." Jacob's expression shifted, something vulnerable flickering across his hard features. "You could have been killed." But I was not, and neither were you. Penelope leaned forward. Jacob, I do not know what I am doing. I left everything behind to come west, and I am terrified most of the time, but I am also more alive than I have ever been. And today, when I shot that rifle, when I refused to let those bandits win, I felt strong. I felt like maybe I could actually survive out here. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, you can. Survive, I mean, you have courage. So do you. Courage is not the same as strength. No, Penelope agreed. It is better. Strength is something you are born with. Courage is something you choose. Jacob looked at her, really looked at her, and she felt the weight of his attention like a physical touch. You should eat something, he said finally. You had a hard day. It was not the response she had hoped for, but it was not rejection either. Will you eat with me? He hesitated, and she could see the war playing out behind his eyes. The part of him that wanted to leave to return to his solitary mountain cabin, and the part of him that wanted to stay. All right, he said at last. One meal. They ordered roast chicken and potatoes, and as they ate, Penelope found herself talking more than she had planned. She told him about Boston, about her overbearing father and the brother who had died in the war. About the man her father had tried to make her marry, a wealthy banker who looked at her like she was a prized horse he was considering purchasing. About saving every penny she could, planning her escape for a year, finally buying the stage ticket with hands that shook. Jacob listened without interrupting, his food growing cold on his plate. You left everything, he said when she finished. Family, home, security. For what? For myself, Penelope said simply. For the chance to be more than somebody's daughter or somebody's wife. To see if I could make my own way. She met his eyes. You understand that, do not you? That is why you live in the mountains. His jaw tightened. It is different. How? He looked away. I had my reasons. What reasons? None of your concern. The words came out harsh, a door slamming shut. Penelope refused to back down. You want to know why I really came here tonight? Because when those bandits came back and I thought they were going to kill you, I was terrified, not for myself. For you, a man I had known for all of an hour. That does not make sense, Jacob, but it is true. He stared at her, something raw and almost pained in his eyes. You should not care about me, he said, his voice rough. I am not a good man to care about. I will decide that for myself, thank you. I live alone in the mountains for a reason, Penelope. I do not do well with people. I do not know how to talk about feelings or courtship or any of the things Boston ladies expect. Good, Penelope said. Because I am not a Boston lady anymore. I am just me, and I do not expect anything except honesty. Jacob was silent for a long moment. Then he said, I was married once. Penelope's breath caught. She had not expected that. Her name was Emma, he continued, his voice flat. We married just before I left for the war in 1862. I was 19, she was 17. We had 2 months together before I shipped out. His hands clenched on the table. I fought for 3 years, saw things no man should see, did things that still wake me up at night. When I came home in 1865, I was different, harder. The things I had seen, they changed me. What happened to Emma? Penelope asked softly. She tried. She really did. But I could not talk about the war, could not sleep, could not be the man she married. We fought constantly. I drank too much. Eventually, she said she could not do it anymore. She left me and went back to her family. He finally looked at Penelope. That was 8 years ago. I came west after that, as far from civilization as I could get. Built my cabin where no one could find me, and I have been there ever since. Do you still love her? No, I did not love her even when we were married, not really. We were too young, and the war was coming, and everyone was getting married like the world was ending. He shook his head. But I failed her. I could not be what she needed, so I stopped trying to be anything to anyone. Penelope reached across the table and placed her hand over his. His skin was warm and rough, and she felt him tense at the contact. "You are not that man anymore," she said. "The war has been over for 8 years. You have changed." "Have I, or did I just run away and hide? You saved 3 people today. That does not sound like hiding to me." Jacob looked down at their joined hands. "You should find a nice town man, Penelope. Someone with a house and a job and a future. Not a hermit who lives in the mountains and comes to town 4 times a year." "I should do a lot of things," Penelope said. "But I seem to have stopped caring about should." She squeezed his hand. "I am not asking you to marry me, Jacob. I am just asking if maybe we could get to know each other. Take it slow, see what happens. I leave tomorrow. I will not be back for months. Then I will wait." "That is crazy." "Probably," Penelope agreed. "But I have already shot at bandits today. Crazy seems to be my new normal." Finally, Jacob smiled. It transformed his entire face, softening the hard lines and making him look years younger. "You are the strangest woman I have ever met." "I am going to take that as a compliment." It was one. They sat there in the growing darkness of the saloon, hands still touching across the table, and Penelope felt something shift between them. Not love, not yet, but the possibility of it. The first tentative bridge spanning the distance between 2 lonely people. "Stay one more day," she said. "Please, just one day. Let me show you that not all people bring trouble." Jacob looked at her for a long moment. Then he sighed, and she knew she had won. "One day," he said. "But then I have to go. I have traps to check and a roof to repair before winter." Penelope smiled, trying not to look as delighted as she felt. "One day, that is all I ask." They finished their meal in comfortable silence, and when Jacob walked her back to the general store, the night air was cool and full of stars. Sarah peeked out when they arrived, saw them together, and quickly ducked back inside with a knowing grin. "Thank you," Penelope said at the door. "For dinner, and for staying." Jacob nodded. "Sleep well, Penelope." She watched him walk away into the darkness, his tall figure disappearing toward the boarding house where he must have taken a room, and as she climbed the stairs to her cousin's spare room, she could not stop smiling. The next morning, Penelope woke to sunlight streaming through the thin curtains and the sound of voices below in the store. She dressed quickly in a simple work dress, braided her hair, and came downstairs to find Sarah already behind the counter serving customers. "Good morning, sleeper," Sarah said with a grin. "There is coffee and biscuits in the back." Penelope poured herself a cup and had just taken her first sip when the bell over the door chimed. She turned and saw Jacob enter, ducking slightly to clear the doorframe. In the morning light, he looked less intimidating and more human, though no less attractive. He had changed his shirt to a cleaner one, and his hair was still damp like he had just washed it. "Morning," he said, his eyes finding Penelope. "I thought maybe you would want to see the town, since you will be living here." Penelope's heart did a little skip. "I would like that very much." Sarah made a shooing motion. "Go on, cousin, I can manage here. Just be back by noon. We have inventory to do." Rawhide was not a large town, but what it lacked in size it made up for in character. Jacob showed her everything, his deep voice providing sparse but informative commentary. There was the blacksmith shop run by a man named Tom who greeted Jacob with surprised delight. The doctor's office, where an older woman named Dr. Miller came out and actually hugged Jacob, scolding him for not visiting more often. The church, the boarding house, the small school where a teacher was drilling a dozen children on their letters. "It is a good town," Jacob said as they walked the main street. "People look out for each other. The sheriff is fair. You should be safe here." "Should be," Penelope caught the qualifier. "Nowhere is completely safe, but Rawhide is better than most." He paused. The bandit trouble will pass, it always does. They will either get caught or move on to easier targets. They walked in silence for a bit, and Penelope found herself very aware of his presence beside her. He moved with an easy grace despite his size, alert to everything around them. She noticed how people watched him, some with respect, others with curiosity. "They are staring at us," she murmured. "They are staring at me," Jacob corrected. "I do not usually walk around town with women." He glanced down at her. "Or anyone, really. You must be lonely. I told you, I prefer solitude. Preference and happiness are not the same thing." Jacob stopped walking and turned to face her. They were at the edge of town now, where the buildings gave way to open desert and distant mountains. "Why are you so interested in whether I am happy?" "Because I think you are a good man who has convinced himself he is not. And I think you are punishing yourself for something that was not your fault." His eyes narrowed. "You do not know anything about me. Then tell me. Help me understand." Penelope stepped closer, not letting him intimidate her. "What did you do in the war that was so terrible?" "I killed people." The words were flat, hard. "A lot of people. Men who were just like me, fighting for their homes and families. I was good at it, too good. They made me a sharpshooter, gave me a rifle and a scope, and I killed officers from hundreds of yards away. They never even saw me coming. That was war. You were following orders. That does not make the men any less dead." Jacob's jaw clenched. "I can still see their faces sometimes, the way they fell, the surprise in their eyes when the bullet hit. I dream about them." Penelope felt her throat tighten with emotion. "I am sorry. That must be terrible to carry." "It is what I deserve." "No," she said firmly. "It is what happened, not what you deserve. You did what you had to do to survive, to help your side win. That does not make you a monster, Jacob. It makes you human." He looked at her like she was speaking a foreign language. "Emma thought I was a monster. She said I scared her. Did you hurt her?" "Never. I would never raise a hand to a woman." "Then she was wrong," Penelope said simply. "She was scared because she did not understand. But that was her failing, not yours." Jacob stared at her, and she saw something break in his expression. The hard mask he wore cracked just a little, and underneath was a pain so deep it made her ache. "I do not know how to do this," he said quietly. "How to be around people again. How to trust that I will not ruin everything I touch." "You start small," Penelope said. She reached out and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "One day at a time, one conversation at a time. You do not have to carry everything alone." For a moment she thought he might pull away. Then his fingers tightened around hers, holding on like she was an anchor in a storm. They stood there at the edge of town, hands joined, two broken people beginning to figure out how to fit together. "I have to leave tomorrow," Jacob said finally. "I cannot stay longer. I have responsibilities at the cabin." "I know," Penelope squeezed his hand, "but you will come back in 3 months, maybe 4. I need to lay in supplies for winter. Then I will see you in 3 months. That is a long time to wait for someone you barely know." Penelope smiled. "Then you should probably tell me more about yourself, so I know who I am waiting for." They spent the rest of the morning walking and talking. Jacob told her about his cabin, tucked high in the mountains where the air was thin and clear. About the lake nearby where he fished for trout, the garden he had carved into the rocky soil, the way the sunset turned the peaks gold and purple. About the animals he sometimes saw, elk and deer and the occasional bear. About the absolute silence of winter snow, and the loneliness that sometimes felt like peace and sometimes felt like drowning. Penelope told him about her life in Boston, the endless social calls and tea parties that had felt like slow suffocation. About her mother, who had died of fever, and her father who had never recovered from the loss, becoming cold and controlling. About her dreams of adventure, of seeing mountains and deserts, of being someone more than just a pretty face waiting to be married off. "You will do well here," Jacob said as they headed back toward the general store. "You are tougher than you look." "Is that a compliment?" "Yes." "Then thank you." Penelope smiled up at him. "You are kinder than you pretend to be," he snorted. "I am not kind. You saved my life. You stayed an extra day just because I asked. You have been patient with my questions even though I can tell you would rather be alone. That sounds kind to me." They reached the general store and Jacob stopped outside. Sarah was visible through the window, pretending not to watch them. "I will leave before dawn," Jacob said. "I will not say goodbye." "Why not?" "Because I am bad at goodbyes." He looked down at her and his expression was almost tender. "But I will think about you and I will come back. Promise?" "I promise." Penelope did something bold then. She rose up on her toes and kissed his cheek, feeling the rasp of stubble against her lips. Jacob went very still, barely breathing. "For luck," she said, pulling back. "Come back safe, Jacob Owens." He touched his cheek where she had kissed him, looking stunned. Then he nodded once and walked away without another word. Penelope watched him go, her heart full of something that might have been hope. The next 3 months were both the longest and the shortest of Penelope's life. She threw herself into work at the general store, learning the inventory and the customers, slowly becoming part of the town's fabric. Sarah was patient and kind, teaching her everything from bookkeeping to how to handle difficult customers. Life in Rawhide was nothing like Boston. Here, she wore simple dresses and sturdy boots. She learned to bargain with freight wagon drivers and to measure out nails and flour without fuss. She helped Sarah cook dinners, attended church on Sundays, and slowly made friends with the other women in town. But through it all, she thought about Jacob. She thought about him when she saw men ride past heading into the mountains. She thought about him when the first cold winds of autumn began to blow. She thought about him at night, lying in her small room, wondering if he was thinking about her too. "Any word?" Sarah would ask sometimes, seeing Penelope staring out the window. "Not yet," Penelope would reply. But she refused to give up hope. The bandits struck again twice during those months, hitting freight wagons on the northern road. Sheriff Grant organized posses to hunt them down, but the outlaws always vanished into the Badlands. The town grew more tense, more careful. Men started traveling armed, and women were warned not to go anywhere alone. Penelope bought a small pistol and asked Tom the blacksmith's wife, a sturdy woman named Mary, to teach her how to shoot it properly. Mary had been a frontierswoman for 20 years and was delighted to pass on her knowledge. "You have got good instincts," Mary said after Penelope managed to hit a tin can from 10 paces. "Steady hands, too. Most newcomers shake like leaves." "I am motivated," Penelope said, reloading carefully. "I refuse to be helpless again." By the time October arrived, painting the distant mountains in shades of gold and crimson, Penelope could shoot well enough to defend herself. She could also ride a horse, thanks to lessons from the stable owner. She could cook a decent meal, mend clothes, and balance the store's books without help. She had become, she realized with pride, exactly the kind of independent woman she had dreamed of being. But she still missed Jacob with an ache that surprised her. It was a cold morning in late October when he finally rode into town. Penelope was sweeping the boardwalk in front of the store when she heard the sound of a horse. She looked up, and there he was, riding down the main street on his buckskin gelding, his long hair tied back, his face weathered from months in the high country. Their eyes met across the distance. Jacob dismounted and tied his horse, then walked toward her with that easy, powerful stride. He looked thinner than she remembered, his cheekbones sharper, but his eyes were the same intense blue. "Hello, Penelope," he said. She dropped the broom and walked straight into his arms. Jacob caught her, his strong arms coming around her, and for a moment they just stood there holding each other in the middle of the street. Penelope breathed in the scent of him, with smoke and pine and something wild, and felt a piece of herself slot back into place. "You came back," she whispered against his chest. "I promised." His voice was rough and his arms tightened around her. "I thought about you every day. I thought about you too." They pulled back slightly and Penelope looked up at him. He looked tired, she realized. There were new lines around his eyes and his shoulders were tense. "Are you all right?" she asked. "Long 3 months." He glanced around at the watching townspeople and seemed to realize they were making a scene. "Can we talk somewhere private? The store. Come on." Sarah took one look at them and immediately disappeared into the back room, leaving them alone. Jacob paced the small space like a caged animal, and Penelope could feel the tension radiating from him. "What happened?" she asked. "Nothing. Everything." He ran a hand through his hair. "I tried to stop thinking about you. Told myself I was being stupid, getting attached to a woman I barely knew, but I could not do it. You were in my head all the time. When I was checking traps, when I was fishing, when I was trying to sleep. I kept remembering the way you grabbed my rifle. The way you looked at me like I was not a monster. The way you kissed my cheek." Penelope's heart swelled. "Jacob, let me finish." He stopped pacing and faced her. "I have been alone for 8 years. I thought that was what I wanted, what I needed. But these last 3 months, alone in that cabin, it did not feel like peace anymore. It felt like prison. And I realized that I was not healing up there. I was just hiding." He took a step closer. "You asked me if I was happy," he continued. "The answer is no. I have not been happy in a very long time. But when I was with you, even for just one day, I felt something close to it. I felt like maybe I could be human again. Like maybe I was not broken beyond repair." Penelope felt tears prick her eyes. "You are not broken. Maybe not. Or maybe I am, but you make me want to try to fix it." He reached out and cupped her face in his large, calloused hands. "I am not good at this, at feelings and words, but I need you to know that I am done running. If you still want me, I will try. I will come to town more often. I will learn to be around people again. I will do whatever it takes. If I still want you." Penelope laughed through her tears. "Jacob, I have been waiting for you for 3 months. Of course I still want you." His face transformed with relief and something that might have been joy. Then he bent his head and kissed her. It was nothing like the chaste kisses Penelope had received from suitors in Boston. This was raw and desperate and full of 3 months of longing. His lips were warm and demanding, and when she gasped, he deepened the kiss, one hand sliding into her hair while the other pulled her tight against his solid body. Penelope melted into him, her hands fisting in his shirt, returning the kiss with everything she felt. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jacob rested his forehead against hers. "I do not deserve you," he said roughly. "Good thing I do not care about deserve." Penelope kissed him again, quick and sweet. "I care about you." "I am falling in love with you," Jacob said, the words coming out like a confession. "I think I have been since the moment you grabbed my rifle." Penelope smiled against his lips. "I am falling in love with you, too. I think I have been since the moment you went silent when I did it." They stood there in the quiet of the general store, holding each other, two lonely people who had somehow found their way together. "So what now?" Penelope asked finally. "You cannot keep living in the mountains and only coming down every few months. Not if we are going to have a real chance at this." Jacob was quiet for a long moment. "I could come down more often, once a month maybe, and you could come up, to the cabin, see where I live. I would like that." Penelope pulled back to look at him. "But Jacob, eventually we are going to have to figure out something more permanent. I cannot build a life waiting 3 weeks out of 4 for you to appear." "I know," he sighed. I have been thinking about it. There is good land closer to town, about 5 miles north. I could build a house there. Keep the cabin for hunting trips, but have somewhere closer. It would still be quiet, still be away from crowds, but I would be close enough to come to town daily. You would do that, leave your cabin. I would try, Jacob said. For you, I would try. Penelope felt warmth spread through her chest. I do not want you to give up everything for me. Your cabin, your mountains, that is part of who you are. Then come with me, Jacob said suddenly. Not forever, just for a few weeks. Come see the cabin, see if you could live up there part of the time. We can figure out a compromise, but I need you to see it to understand why it matters to me. Penelope hesitated. Sarah needs me at the store. Sarah managed before you came. She can manage for a few weeks. Jacob's eyes were intense. Please, Penelope, let me show you my world. How could she say no to that? All right, she said, but I will need to prepare. I have no mountain clothes, no supplies. I will help you. We will get everything you need. Jacob kissed her forehead. Thank you for trusting me. Over the next 3 days, they prepared for the journey. Jacob took Penelope to the general store after hours and helped her pick out practical clothes. Wool pants that would fit under her skirts for warmth, sturdy boots, thick socks, a heavy coat. He bought supplies, flour and coffee and dried meat, loading them into packs with the efficiency of long practice. Mary, the blacksmith's wife, found out about the trip and pulled Penelope aside. You be careful up there, she said, her weathered face serious. Mountains are beautiful but unforgiving. You do exactly what Jacob tells you when he tells you. He knows those peaks like the back of his hand, but one wrong step can still kill you. I will be careful, Penelope promised. And honey, Mary smiled. That man looks at you like you hung the moon. Do not let him go. I do not plan to. They left on a crisp November morning with Sheriff Grant and half the town there to see them off. Sarah hugged Penelope tightly. If he does not bring you back safe, I will hunt him down myself, she threatened. Jacob, overhearing, actually smiled. I will guard her with my life. See that you do. The ride into the mountains was both beautiful and terrifying. They followed narrow trails that wound between towering pines, crossed streams running clear and cold, and climbed steadily higher. Penelope rode a gentle mare that Jacob had borrowed from the stable, and though she was not an expert rider yet, she managed to keep up. Jacob was in his element here. She could see it in the way his shoulders relaxed, the way he moved through the wilderness with unconscious grace. He pointed out animal tracks, edible plants, places where the trail became treacherous. He was patient with her slower pace, never making her feel foolish or weak. They camped the first night in a small clearing, and Jacob built a fire with quick efficiency. Penelope helped as best she could, though she was clearly out of her depth. She had never slept outdoors before, never cooked over an open fire, never used the woods for a privy. But she did not complain. She watched Jacob, learned from him, and slowly began to understand why he loved this wild, harsh place. It is so quiet, she said as they sat by the fire after dinner. The sun had set, and above them, the stars were brighter than she had ever seen. No carriages, no voices, just silence. That is why I came here, Jacob said. He was sitting close enough that their shoulders touched. After the war, my head was too loud, full of screams and gunshots and dying men. The silence helped. Does it still help? Yes, but it is not enough anymore. He looked at her. You are enough. Penelope leaned her head on his shoulder, and they sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn down to embers. The cabin appeared on the afternoon of the third day, nestled in a small valley surrounded by peaks. It was larger than Penelope had expected, built of solid logs with a stone chimney and glass windows. A small garden plot, empty now for winter, sat to one side. A stream ran nearby and the view was breathtaking. "You built this?" Penelope asked in awe. "Took me 2 years," Jacob said. There was pride in his voice. "But it is mine. Every log, every stone." Inside, the cabin was simple but comfortable. There was a large main room with a fireplace, a table and chairs, a bed in one corner. A smaller back room held supplies and furs. Everything was neat and organized, the home of a man who took care of what was his. "It is wonderful," Penelope said, running her hand over the smooth table surface. "I can see why you love it here." Over the next 2 weeks, Penelope learned to live in the mountains. Jacob taught her to fish in the cold stream, standing behind her with his arms around her, guiding her hands on the pole. He taught her to shoot his rifle properly, correcting her stance and her breathing until she could hit a target at 50 yards. He showed her which plants were safe to eat, how to read the weather in the clouds, how to move quietly through the forest. And at night, they lay together in his bed, wrapped in furs against the cold, and talked until they fell asleep. They talked about everything, their fears and dreams, their pasts and possible futures. Jacob told her more about the war, about the friends he had lost, the guilt he carried. Penelope told him about her mother, about feeling trapped in Boston, about the terror and exhilaration of coming west. They kissed, but Jacob never pushed for more. He was careful with her, almost reverent, and Penelope loved him for it even as she grew frustrated with his restraint. "I am not made of glass," she told him one night as they lay tangled together, both breathing hard from kisses that had grown heated. "I know." Jacob's voice was strained. "But I want to do this right, court you properly, marry you before marry me." Penelope's heart stuttered. Jacob pulled back to look at her, his eyes serious in the firelight. "Yes, if you will have me." "I know it is fast, I know I am not much of a catch, but—" "Yes," Penelope interrupted. "Yes, I will marry you." His face broke into the most beautiful smile she had ever seen. "Really, really?" She pulled him down for a kiss. "I love you, Jacob Owens. I do not care if it is fast. I do not care if you are not some wealthy Boston banker. I love you exactly as you are. I love you too." Jacob kissed her deeply, thoroughly. "We will do it right. Go back to town, talk to the preacher, have a proper wedding." "Or," Penelope said, trailing her fingers down his chest, "we could consider ourselves betrothed now and let nature take its course." Jacob groaned. "You are going to be the death of me, woman. Is that a yes?" His answer was to kiss her again, and this time he did not hold back. They made love in front of the fire, slow and tender and full of emotion. Jacob was gentle despite his size, careful of her inexperience, and when Penelope cried out his name, he held her like she was precious. Afterward they lay wrapped in furs, her head on his chest, his hand stroking her hair. "I never thought I would have this," Jacob said quietly. "Happiness, connection, love, neither did I." Penelope kissed his chest. "But here we are." "Here we are," he agreed. They spent one more week at the cabin, and by the time they rode back down to Rawhide, Penelope felt like she had lived in the mountains for years instead of 3 weeks. Her skin was tanned, her hands were calloused, and she could shoot and fish and ride like she had been born to it. More importantly, she and Jacob had become truly inseparable. They moved around each other with an easy intimacy, communicating as much with looks and touches as with words. They were partners, equals, and it showed. When they rode into Rawhide, Sarah took one look at them and grinned. "Well, I suppose I should start planning a wedding." "How did you know?" Penelope asked, laughing. "Oh, please. You two are looking at each other like you invented love. It is disgustingly sweet." Sarah hugged them both. "I am happy for you, both of you." The wedding was held 2 weeks later, in the small church with the whole town in attendance. Penelope wore a dress that Sarah and the other women had helped her make, simple white cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs. Jacob wore new clothes for the occasion, dark pants and a white shirt, though he had refused to cut his hair. Penelope was glad. She loved his long hair. Sheriff Grant stood up as Jacob's best man, and Sarah stood with Penelope. The preacher kept the ceremony short and simple, just the way they wanted. "Do you, Jacob Owens, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold in sickness and health for richer or poorer as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Jacob said, his voice steady and sure. "And do you, Penelope Lancaster, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold in sickness and health for richer or poorer as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Penelope said, tears of joy in her eyes. "Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Nevada, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Jacob, you may kiss your bride." Jacob did, thoroughly and to the loud approval of the assembled townspeople. They spent their wedding night at the boarding house, in the best room available, and Penelope felt like her heart might burst with happiness. This was it. This was the life she had dreamed of, the adventure she had craved. Not just the wildness of the West, but the wildness of loving and being loved completely. True to his word, Jacob began building a house on the land north of town. It took him through the winter and into the spring, but he worked tirelessly, and many of the townsmen helped. The house was smaller than the cabin but well built, with 2 bedrooms and a real kitchen and windows that looked out toward the mountains. Penelope divided her time between helping Sarah at the store and helping Jacob with the house. She learned carpentry, how to swing a hammer and measure boards. She planted a garden in the spring, vegetables and herbs that would feed them through the next winter. They still went to the mountain cabin sometimes, a few weeks here and there when the weather was good. Penelope loved those trips, loved the solitude and the way Jacob was so completely himself up there. But she also loved their house near town, loved being part of a community, loved having friends and neighbors. She had found the balance she needed, and so had Jacob. The bandits that had plagued the territory were finally caught in the spring of 1874, a large posse led by the territorial marshal, tracking them into the Badlands and bringing them to justice. Rawhide celebrated for 3 days straight, and the roads became safe again. In the summer, Penelope realized she was pregnant. She told Jacob one evening as they sat on the porch of their house, watching the sun set over the mountains. He had just come back from working on the garden, his shirt off, his muscular torso gleaming with sweat. She loved watching him work, loved the way he moved, the strength in every line of his body. "Jacob," she said, her heart hammering, "I have something to tell you." He looked over, immediately alert to the tone in her voice. "What is it? Are you all right?" "I am fine. Better than fine." She took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby." Jacob went very still, then his face transformed with wonder and joy. "A baby, a baby," Penelope confirmed, laughing. "Are you happy?" He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. "Happy, Penelope, I am terrified and thrilled, and I love you so much I can barely stand it. So yes then." "Yes," he said, laughing. "Yes, I am happy." Their son was born in the spring of 1875, during a warm April afternoon with Sarah and Dr. Miller in attendance. Jacob paced outside the bedroom like a caged bear, and when he finally heard the baby's cry, he nearly broke down the door getting in. "You have a son, Doctor," Miller said with a smile, handing the squalling infant to Jacob. Jacob took the baby with shaking hands, staring down at the tiny face with an expression of absolute awe. "He is perfect," he whispered. "Of course he is," Penelope said from the bed, exhausted but glowing. "Look at his parents." They named him Thomas, after Jacob's father who had died when Jacob was young. Little Thomas had his father's blue eyes and his mother's dark hair, and from the moment he was born, he had both of them wrapped around his tiny finger. Jacob proved to be a devoted father. He carved toys for Thomas, told him stories, carried him everywhere in a sling against his massive chest. Watching her huge, scarred mountain man of a husband tenderly care for their infant son made Penelope fall in love with him all over again. As Thomas grew, Jacob taught him the same things he had taught Penelope: how to track animals, how to fish, how to respect the wildness. They spent weeks at a time at the mountain cabin, the three of them, living simply and joyfully. 2 years later, they had a daughter. They named her Emma Rose, partly after Jacob's first wife as a gesture of peace with the past, and partly because Penelope simply loved the name. Emma had Penelope's green eyes and Jacob's stubborn streak, and she grew up wild and free, as comfortable in the mountains as she was in town. The years passed in a happy blur. Jacob continued to split his time between their house and the cabin, working as a guide for hunters and trappers, occasionally helping the sheriff track criminals. Penelope helped Sarah run the general store, which had grown significantly over the years. They were respected members of the community, their home always open to friends and neighbors. Thomas grew into a tall, strong boy who worshipped his father and wanted to be just like him. Emma grew into a fierce, independent girl who could outshoot most of the boys in town and was not afraid of anything. On their 10th anniversary, Jacob took Penelope back to the spot where they had first met, the canyon where he had saved her from bandits. They stood there hand in hand, looking at the place that had changed both their lives. "You remember what you said to that bandit?" Jacob asked, a smile in his voice. "When he demanded your mother's locket, I said no," Penelope replied. "It was the first time I ever really stood up for myself. And then you grabbed my rifle and shot at armed men despite never having fired a gun before." Jacob shook his head. "I knew right then that you were special, that you were different." "And you went completely silent," Penelope said, laughing. The big, tough mountain man, struck speechless by a Boston lady with no idea what she was doing. "Not speechless," Jacob corrected. "Just trying to figure out how I had gotten so lucky." Penelope turned to face him, rising on her toes to kiss him. "We both got lucky. Two lost people who found each other in the middle of nowhere." "Best thing that ever happened to me," Jacob said against her lips. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me." They stood there in the canyon as the sun set, two people who had rescued each other in more ways than one, and knew that they had found exactly what they needed. Years later, when their children were grown and had children of their own, Jacob and Penelope still returned to their mountain cabin for weeks at a time. Jacob's hair had gone silver, and Penelope's face bore lines of age and laughter, but they were still as in love as they had been that first day. Thomas had become a rancher, settling on land east of Rawhide with his wife and 4 children. Emma had married a teacher and lived in town, running the general store that Sarah had left to Penelope when she retired. On a warm summer evening in 1895, 22 years after they had met, Jacob and Penelope sat on the porch of their mountain cabin, watching the stars come out. "You ever regret it?" Jacob asked, his arm around her shoulders. "Leaving Boston, coming west, marrying a mountain man?" Penelope looked at him, this man who had saved her life and then given her a new one, who had loved her fiercely and completely for more than 2 decades, who had built her a home, raised children with her, and never once made her feel like she was anything less than his equal partner. "Not for a single second," she said. "You are my greatest adventure, Jacob Owens." He smiled and kissed her temple. "And you are mine, Penelope Owens, and you are mine." They sat together in the comfortable silence of long marriage, Two souls who had found each other against all odds and built a love that would last the rest of their lives. The mountains stood eternal around them, witness to a love story that had begun with gunshots and fear, and had grown into something beautiful and unbreakable. A story of a woman who had found her courage and a man who had found his way home. And as the stars wheeled overhead and the stream sang its endless song, Jacob and Penelope held each other close, grateful for every moment, every choice, every twist of fate that had brought them together. In the end, it had all started with a rifle shot and a stubborn refusal to be a victim. It had grown into trust, then friendship, then love, and it had blossomed into a life neither of them could have imagined but both of them cherished beyond measure. Thomas and Emma visited often with the grandchildren, filling the cabin with laughter and noise. Jacob taught his grandsons to shoot and track, while Penelope taught her granddaughters to be brave and independent. The cycle continued, generation after generation, the lessons of courage and love passed down. On their 25th anniversary, the whole family gathered in Rawhide for a celebration. The town had grown significantly over the years, with new buildings and a railroad station, but it still retained its frontier charm. The Lucky Coyote Saloon, where Jacob and Penelope had shared their first meal together, was still standing, still serving the best roast chicken in Nevada. Sheriff Grant, now retired but still spry, stood up to give a toast. 25 years ago, I watched a confirmed hermit walk into town with a beautiful woman, and I knew his days of solitude were numbered. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Jacob and Penelope, you have shown all of us what real love looks like, what partnership looks like, what it means to build a life together through good times and hard times. You have raised fine children, contributed to this community, and set an example we all aspire to. Here is to 25 more years. The crowd cheered and clinked glasses. Jacob stood, pulling Penelope up with him. I am not much for speeches, he said, his deep voice carrying through the room. But I want to say this. 25 years ago, I was a broken man hiding in the mountains. I thought I would live and die alone, and I had made peace with that. Then this woman shot at bandits with my rifle despite never having fired a gun before, and everything changed. He looked down at Penelope, love shining in his eyes. She did not rescue me from bandits that day. She rescued me from myself. From loneliness, from fear, from the belief that I did not deserve happiness. Penelope, you are the bravest person I have ever known, and I thank God every day that you grabbed my rifle and refused to be helpless. Tears streamed down Penelope's face as she stood on her toes to kiss him. And I thank God every day that you stopped to help strangers, even though you could have ridden on. That you stayed when I asked you to. That you took a chance on a foolish Boston lady who had no idea what she was getting into. You knew exactly what you were getting into, Jacob corrected with a smile. You always have. They kissed again to thunderous applause. The years continued to roll by as they do. Jacob's hair turned white, and his face grew more lined, but his blue eyes remained sharp, and his love for Penelope never wavered. Penelope's dark hair silvered, and she moved a bit slower, but her spirit remained as fierce as the day she had faced down those bandits. They split their time between their house near town and the mountain cabin, though the trips to the high country grew shorter as their bodies aged. But they never stopped going. The mountains were part of who they were, part of their story, and they could not imagine life without them. In the spring of 1903, 30 years after that fateful day in the canyon, Jacob fell ill. It started as a cough, nothing serious, but it settled in his lungs and would not leave. Dr. Miller's son, who had taken over the practice when his mother retired, did what he could, but pneumonia was a harsh mistress. Penelope nursed Jacob through it, refusing to leave his side. Thomas and Emma came with their families, filling the house with love and support. But everyone knew that Jacob was fading on a warm May evening with the windows open to let in the mountain breeze. Jacob called Penelope to his bedside. She came immediately, taking his hand in hers. "Do not look so sad," he said, his voice weak but still warm. "I have had a good life. A better life than I ever thought possible." "You cannot leave me," Penelope said, tears streaming. "Not yet. We still have so much time left." "We have had 30 years," Jacob said gently. 30 years more than I deserved. 30 years of love and laughter and adventure." "Not many people get that, Penelope. We are lucky." "I do not feel lucky right now. I know." He reached up with his free hand to wipe away her tears. "But you are the strongest person I have ever known. You will be all right. Thomas and Emma will take care of you. The grandchildren will keep you busy, and I will be waiting for you wherever we go next. Promise," Penelope whispered. "Promise." Jacob smiled, that beautiful smile that still made her heart flutter. "I love you, Penelope Owens. Thank you for rescuing me." "I love you too," Penelope said, leaning down to kiss him one last time. "Thank you for letting me." Jacob closed his eyes, still holding her hand, and slipped away peacefully as the sun set over the mountains he had loved so much. The town mourned him. Jacob Owens had become a legend in Rawhide, the mountain man with a heart of gold who had helped countless people over the years. They buried him in the small cemetery on the hill, with a view of the mountains and a simple headstone that read, "Jacob Owens, 1843–1903. Beloved husband, father, and friend." Penelope thought her heart would break. For weeks, she moved through life in a fog, going through the motions but feeling hollow inside. Thomas and Emma tried to help, but grief was something she had to work through on her own. Finally, a month after Jacob's death, she rode up to the mountain cabin alone. Thomas had protested, but she had been firm. She needed to do this. The cabin was exactly as they had left it last fall. Penelope walked through the rooms, touching Jacob's things, remembering. She could almost feel his presence, almost hear his deep voice pointing out a deer through the window or telling her about the weather. She spent 3 days there, crying and remembering and slowly beginning to heal. On the last night, she sat on the porch watching the stars, wrapped in one of Jacob's old coats. "I miss you," she said to the night. "I miss you so much it feels like I cannot breathe sometimes. But you were right. We were lucky. We had 30 amazing years together, and I would not trade a single moment of it, not even to avoid this pain." The wind whispered through the pines, and Penelope smiled through her tears. She could almost imagine it was Jacob, telling her it was all right, that she would be all right. She returned to Rawhide the next day and threw herself back into life. She helped Emma run the store, spent time with her grandchildren, became the unofficial grandmother to half the children in town. She told stories about Jacob to anyone who would listen, keeping his memory alive. And twice a year, spring and fall, she made the journey to the mountain cabin and spent a few days there, talking to Jacob and remembering. Penelope lived for another 12 years, dying peacefully in her sleep in the winter of 1915 at the age of 64. Her children and grandchildren were with her, and her last words were, "I am coming, Jacob. Wait for me." They buried her next to Jacob on the hill, with a matching headstone that read Penelope Owens, 1851–1915. Beloved wife, mother, and friend, she grabbed the rifle and changed everything. The house near town was passed down to Emma's family, and the mountain cabin was kept in the family, used by generations of Owens descendants who came to love the high country as much as their famous ancestors had. And sometimes, people swore they could see 2 figures on the cabin's porch at sunset, sitting close together, looking out at the mountains. An older couple, content and in love, still together even after death. The story of Jacob and Penelope Owens became part of Rawhide's history, told and retold around dinner tables and campfires. The story of a mountain man who rescued a woman from bandits expecting tears and gratitude, only to have her grab his rifle and shoot back. The story of two lost souls who found each other in the wild Nevada desert and built a love that lasted through everything. It was a story of courage, of second chances, of refusing to be helpless or alone. It was a story of partnership and respect and the kind of deep, abiding love that sustains people through both joy and sorrow. Most importantly, it was a story that proved that sometimes the greatest adventures start with a single moment of bravery, a refusal to give up, a willingness to take a chance on someone unexpected. Penelope had left Boston looking for freedom and independence. She had found that, but she had also found something she had not known she was looking for. A man who saw her strength and loved her for it. A man who became her partner in every sense of the word. And Jacob had hidden in the mountains looking for peace and silence. He had found that, but he had also found something he had not known he needed. A woman who refused to let him hide from life. A woman who loved him not despite his scars but because of them, because they were part of his story. Together, they had built something beautiful. A family, a home, a legacy that would last for generations. The rifle that Penelope had grabbed that day, the one that had started everything, was kept in the family as an heirloom. Passed down from generation to generation. It served as a reminder of that pivotal moment when a proper Boston lady became a fierce Western woman, and a broken mountain man learned to love again. And on the handle of that rifle, carved carefully into the wood, were two sets of initials, Joe and PL, intertwined forever, just as their lives had been in the end. That was what mattered. Not the danger they had faced or the hardships they had overcome, but the love they had found and nurtured and protected through 30 years of marriage. A love that had transformed them both, made them better, made them whole. The mountains of Nevada stood eternal, bearing witness to countless stories of struggle and triumph. But the story of Jacob and Penelope Owens was special. It was a reminder that love can bloom in the most unexpected places, between the most unlikely people. And that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is reach out and hold on to someone who understands you. It was a story that began with a rifle shot and ended with a lifetime of happiness. And in between was everything that made life worth living. Laughter and tears, struggle and triumph, growth and change, and above all, love. Deep, enduring, transformative love. The kind of love that rescues you from yourself and shows you who you truly are. The kind of love that lasts forever.